All right. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to CPS for grilling me under that light. I'm going to tell you something about myself because I didn't trust Neil to get it right. So that's coming up in a second. But I got to tell you, when you talk about commitment, it was Ansel Adams, whose birthday was today, right? Yeah. Is that true? Who said, the secret of photography is F8 and be there. So I got here. I landed at 5:25. I got my luggage since my coat was in there, and otherwise I'd be soaking wet. Left the airport at 6:05 and got here at 6:35. So apart from the 2 speeding tickets, no, I'm fine. Amazing what you can do driving down the median. I also got a text on the plane coming here. I was in Orlando, and to be honest, I went down there Sunday morning, and it was horrible for a photographer like me because it was 82 and clear blue skies for 3 days. And as I'm going to explain, and I landed at 11:30, so by the time I got to where the birds were, it was about 1 o'clock, and that ain't good. Too much light, harsh shadows, all that kind of stuff. Today I woke up, there was a cloud, and I thought this would be great, but I had to get on a plane. So then I got a text while I was on the plane. I had the legal Wi-Fi and got that text. There's a night launch at Cape Canaveral tonight, and we have a place to watch if you want to come. So I'm here instead, but that would have been awesome. So now you got to pay attention. All right, so what I'm going to try to do tonight is distill what could easily, I think, be 3 or 4 hours worth of information if we dig in and get to the details about nature photography. I'm going to put that into only 3 hours, into an hour and something. If I go too fast here as we get going, we'll get to drink faster. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, the basic types of nature photography, at least how I define them, and other people will define them, I'm sure slightly differently, but I'll tell you why I think that these are the categories. I'm going to talk some general photographic techniques because I think one of the things, when you have a wedding, that's 2 bad lights, okay. When you have a wedding photographer come to speak to you, and you don't do wedding photography, you might tend to want to tune that out. And I know not a lot of you are nature photographers, by passion. You may do it, you may go outside, you may go to the zoo, the botanic garden, or whatever, but the basic techniques of focusing, composing, lighting, getting the shot to mean something and tell a story are all the same, no matter what the type of photography. So I'm going to try to incorporate that as we go today. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about gear. That's where Bill's happy, but he whispered to me there are no 50% discounts on Canon, so since I primarily shoot Canon, I guess that's not really going to apply, but I will talk about gear, what I consider the essential gear, and I got a little overboard maybe on the essential side, but it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're going to the zoo, there's things in there you don't need. But then some what-if stuff if you're going for a 4 or 5 day trip, especially like I'm going to Alaska by float plane to the Katmai Peninsula to be, from me to Bill away from grizzly bears for 3 days. There's certain things you might want to take that you wouldn't take to Lincoln Park. And then some advanced techniques, tips, and the like that I've learned from others or learned through the life experience of making plenty of mistakes. So why am I able to come up and talk about nature? I grew up in the outdoors. I grew up in the Wild West, downtown Flint, Michigan, but that was a different kind of. But we moved out to the country when I was 9, 10 years old, lived on 25 acres, surrounded by lots of other land. People had horses down the road. You saw animals in your backyard. It wasn't out of the ordinary to walk to the backyard and say, oh, look, I have a caterpillar or a katydid or there's a pheasant or whatever. So I was surrounded by a lot of nature. I took a lot of it for granted, I'll be honest with you. I got my first camera when I was 10 years old. My mom, I'm sure, paid no more than $1 at a rummage sale for a 35 millimeter of some kind. And I scrounged pop bottles and the like so I could afford film. Then I'd scrounge more pop bottles, do errands for neighbors, pick crops. We literally we carried the wagon up and down the road until nobody would take zucchini from us anymore. Then we'd go at night and leave it for them anyway. But we would sell stuff to get the money to process that 35 millimeter. So I really didn't have a lot of extra cash, so I didn't take extraneous photos. But I still have, off that first roll of film, one of the photos, a black and white of my buddy, who was also 10, standing on his porch with the sliding glass door, half in, half out, with his arm and leg like this, and because of the reflective angle, it looked like he was flying. So I'm proud that 48 years later, I took an image that is still around, and he still appreciates it. I got a degree in biology, which made sense because I was always around animals. Got to take a lot of animals apart, understand a little bit about them, but also got to understand, the role of nature, how to observe nature, how you get from chrysalis to moth and back around and that kind of thing. And so that gave me some background. And of course, that was excellent. The biology and chemistry degrees did a lot of good when I became an insurance defense lawyer. But here I am not doing any of those today. I took photos for a long time. I never even thought I took a lot of photos, but we did a 32 or 33 year reunion for college, and it was set off, of course, by everybody on Facebook, and we started finding each other and got 50 or 60 people together, and they said, bring all your photos, and especially you, Jerry, because you were the only guy with a camera. I don't even remember owning a camera in college, but it turns out that I did, and I had a lot of really embarrassing photos taken. So I kept doing that. I thought my photos were decent. Lots of people liked them. I strived to get better. I took no formal education in photography, including reading the manuals, up until after January of 2009. I went to Australia for 3 weeks. And I took one camera body and one lens. I had paid big money because it was an expensive trip, and I bought a Canon 28-300. I said, if you're going to do it right. So I took everything on that continent for 3 weeks with that one camera. And when it fogged up, because the humidity was so high in cairns, then you just hoped the birds didn't move while you kept wiping it off and trying to shoot in between the hazing that went on. But when I got back and people loved the photos and said, gee, where are they going to be? I'd love to have a copy. And I tried to compare them to real nature photographers, I realized how badly I sucked. And so from that point on, and I actually, in this presentation, have a couple of images from that trip, just to throw them in and kind of, I consider that the moment I started being a nature photographer. Since then, I've been fortunate enough, because of my work, to be able to travel a lot of places, and I go off on little trips. This trip I just got back from this afternoon, last year, was in Dallas, and I flew to Salt Lake City for the first time in my life. I got out of the airport, and went and shot eagles, a great experience where we were 30 or 40 yards away and watched the behavior, the feeding behavior, and watched them fight each other. Went back and met the same guy last year in June, went to Yellowstone for the first time in my life, found 44 bears to photograph in 5 days, when most people drive through the park and go, they don't have bears. And that's where the biology part, the nature part comes in, understanding the behavior, knowing we're seeing a bear and knowing if we go around, it's going to come through the valley on the other side, and waiting until a half mile later, it comes right in your face, as happened. One of the shots that's in the next room over there was 13 yards away from a black bear. And that was pretty cool. And then went to Moab, Utah in November, and was fortunate enough to work with Richard Burnaby, who shoots for National Geographic. He's a published author, and has become a pretty good friend of mine. He's a guy I'm going to shoot grizzlies with, and he taught me the right way to shoot landscapes. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of that information with you tonight. And if I don't set that down, I'm going to knock all my mics off. So what is nature photography? Now, we're not going to talk about all of this because I couldn't get a tank in here big enough to dive in today, so we're going to leave underwater and astrophotography off. But generally, landscapes, wildlife, and macro. So going from the very vast to the individual subjects, and then kind of diving into the personal details of their world. And I can talk about star photography as well, but try to keep the time. So to me, what's the definition, run through the lights, of the landscape. To me, it's predominantly about the natural features. In other words, there's not a subject per se in terms of an animal or a person or whatnot. I don't happen to care if you have people or animals in there. In some cases, like the famous Mormon Ranch out in Grand Tetons, I mean, that's considered part of the natural feature. Everybody wants that photo. I could have got it, but the snow was that deep when I was there 2 weeks ago, and I didn't have snowshoes, so, well, plus there was no visibility, so the mountains didn't exist behind it, but I'm sure it's a good shot in good weather. But that's a situation where people go out in nature specifically to take that cabin set against the grandeur of the Grand Tetons. So that notwithstanding, I think it's predominantly about the natural features. So when you're looking to shoot landscapes, there's got to be some attention paid to those features. And I'll say it now because it's not on any other slides, is for many years I used the professional button on my camera, and it worked really well. I think I used the professional setting for every shot I took in Australia. I really want to go back and do some of them correctly now. So people, you know, when they say landscapes to you, you think a landscape, there's a cityscape, but that's a landscape of buildings that it's wide, it's panoramic. It doesn't need to be that. Landscapes can include things as limited as shooting a 7200 nice and tight on a waterfall. And then how do I capture that waterfall? How do I put my settings? Do I want soft, silky, flowing water, or do I want the harsh, you know, banging of the water upon the rocks coming down? Shooting other natural objects that could be as you know, as distinct as a single tree or a single field of flowers. So what are some characteristics of landscape photography? To me, here's a landscape in which we were able to, well, I took this out of a car window while we were moving slowly, so it's not the best photo, but to catch the sense of scale. Put an object in your photos. This is something you can do in any other kind of photography as well. You know, if you're in front of a giant mountain and have somebody like Nima standing there, you go, either that's a really huge hill or he's a miniature person. And both would be true probably, right? So here, trying to capture a sense of scale, that butte was not really that pretty, but it gave you a sense of the vastness of the desert, and this is Moab, Utah, by having a hot air balloon. If you've ever been close to one, they're pretty impressive by themselves. So here it's just an insignificant dot. Here's a situation of having an animal in a photo. I took this one 10 days ago. The elk were coming down off the hillside. They'd actually come through the birches, and I'd missed this particular shot because I was going about 75 miles an hour. And we came and turned around and walked back and found a place where we could hunker down in the snow and wait for the elk to move. And so they were coming down through the alders at the bottom. Because the alders weren't pretty, that's why I converted to black and white. But here's a situation, I mean, is that a wildlife shot, or is it, and here it's cropped off, it's actually, there's more all the way around it. But, you know, what kind of shot is that? Is it a landscape that happens to have an elk? Or is it an elk and I was not good enough to crop the trees out the back? But I'll suggest, to me, it's probably a landscape. Now, this isn't technically a landscape, I suppose, it's a seascape. But, you know, there's a situation where you got a couple of people in it. Again, it helps set the sense of scale for the photo. This one was at night. That's moonlight reflected for the most part. And it was just, you know, to me, I just wanted to get the calm and the quiet and the simple lines of that photo. And I took this one in Salt Lake City. After the snow came through and the rain came through, I was on a place called Antelope Island. And the horizon, if you had seen it, would have been the Great Salt Lake, and then some roads, and then some power poles, and then maybe some trucks going along the road. But by cropping this in a little bit, and if you could see it close, I mean, you could see the individual trees in that. So we'll talk about focus and how you achieve that and get that sense. But here's a situation where, again, using the clouds high and low to frame a landscape. To me, that's kind of could be a better picture, but a classic sort of landscape you might take. So how do I contrast that with wildlife? So with wildlife, I think about life. So stones, landscape, life, whether it be trees or animals, fish, flowers at the Botanic Garden. To me, that's the wildlife, and that's where I put them apart. I like to call myself an animal portraitist, meaning I like to get in close. So I'm going to talk about equipment you don't need to buy, but that 28-300 was nice until I wish it was a 500. It was a little late in Australia because I couldn't figure out where to buy anything else. But you get out and shoot somebody's 400, you want 5. You shoot the 5, you want the 8. Then you realize how heavy the 8 is, and so you go back to a 24-70 point and shoot, and you say, screw it, I'm not a nature photographer. And I'm going to forget later, so I'm going to tell you this quick story, and then I'll show you the moral of the story is going to come up in some slides. But I could go like this and tie a string, and I'll still forget. I was shooting at the CALUMET Eagle workshop 2 years ago. It didn't come together this spring, so it was last February in 2013. And I had my own equipment. I was shooting probably the Canon 500 millimeter f4. It's about an 8-pound lens. And I'm shooting it on a 1DX. And I'm standing at Lock and Dam 14, and I'm swinging on birds. And if you've never heard the 1DX, I can show you a little bit. It goes brrrr, which just means if you didn't get focused, you just got 12 pieces of garbage that need to be disposed of. But it sounds impressive to the Nikon D90 guys going click, click, click. So the second day, when we were getting ready to leave, when it was raining sideways and looked a whole lot like this out on the river, some random woman I'd never met before comes up with her husband in tow, and of course he's like this behind her, but she's on a mission. And there were only 2 of us at the Lock and Dam right then, Paul Shura, who's since moved down to Florida, good friend of ours, and myself. And she walks up and she goes, "You have to help me." Okay, I don't work for Calumet. I went to the event, and nobody from Calumet was there because it was raining and there were no birds. She said, they rented me a bad piece of equipment. And she's got the 600 millimeter, the big Nikkor lens. And you carry that Gokhan, it was 8-10 pounds, right? It's a big piece of metal. She goes, my pictures are junk and none of them are great, and I know you know what you're doing. Because probably on Saturday she heard machine gunning. And so she says, help me. And I looked and I said, well, the first problem I can identify is you're shooting a Nikon. I had to get it in. I was afraid I was going to forget that part. Paul shot Nikon. So he said, let me take a look at it. So he at least gets to the point where they can see this LCD screen, because I couldn't even figure out how to get there. I now own a D800, which I bought last summer, so that when people like that walk up to me, I can go, ah. I'll still blame the Nikon, but I'll know how to turn on the LCD screen. So she shows me the photos, and she goes, your photos were good, mine are junk. And on that screen, however big it was, there's a sand pebble of a bird. She goes, people love my photos, they want to buy my stuff, I get praise from all of my friends. And I looked at that little sand pebble. It was probably 1/25th or 1/50th of the side of the screen was this bird. And I said, where did you take the shot? She goes, standing right where you were. I said, well, I know you were standing here. Where was the bird? Well, it was right out there. I said, right out there where? Because the river's 300 yards wide. Out there past the buoy. I said, okay, let's assume you are the best photographer in the world. Some of you might dispute that. You've never even met the lady. You're the best photographer in the world. Let's get a vase of flowers. Let's put it right here. Let's light it properly. Let's have you take that photo. All of your friends want to line up to buy an 8x10. Okay. And the guys, he can see where I'm going. He started to do this. He's getting wet and he can't go anywhere because she's got a mission. And I said, now let's take that pot of flowers and run all the way to the other end of a football field and set it down under the goalpost, take the same shot and tell me how many of your friends like it. That's the basic problem of nature. You buy the big equipment, you think the glass helps. I don't care if you got an 800, I don't care if you do stacking of your teleconverters, which I've done to get up to 1600 millimeters. If you're not close enough, you're not going to get a photo. So we're going to come back and talk about some of that. That's one of the characteristics that I'm going to talk about. All right, this photo was taken on the way back from Moab with, I'm trying to remember what I was shooting, 400 millimeter f2.8. Still a big lens. I don't have it with me, but it was pretty good size. I'm going to talk about gear in a little while. So it's about this big. Also, don't leave your bag open in Moab because sand is everywhere. This is smaller than what I had because the 400 f2.8's got about 40–50% bigger glass at the end. But that's the only lens I had with me at the moment I found the RAM. So what I did is I moved to a point where I could get decent shots of them. Whereupon, having climbed up the rocks and got to the place where I could take the shot, the mountain ram got curious and came 6 yards away from me. So that's why, here's a classic portrait, right? Peter Hurley would do this, right? You cut off the top of the head a little bit, right? You do that. That's how you frame the shot. So sometimes the best plans, the most equipment isn't going to help you. Here's a really terrible photo I took a couple of weeks ago. And it looks significantly better there, obviously, than on screen. But try to get animals to do something when you're taking a wildlife photo. The reason I liked this, and you'll see there's another shot that's maybe you can see better, is that I was panning, trying to follow the bird, but in my haste to try to get critical focus here, because that's all I cared about, I didn't pay attention to the fact that I was shooting too slow because it was kind of light outside. So, I mean, it wasn't that light outside. So I ended up shooting this bird at about 1/500th of a second, maybe, I don't think it was 1/800th. So the head's in focus because I panned and followed, but the feathers aren't sharp. The ends, the fingers of the wings aren't sharp. I mean, it's still a decent shot. Well, what would you do if you were taking people photos like this? Somebody riding a bicycle down the street, you're going to pan on them, you're going to try to keep them in reasonable focus. But even there, think about your shutter speed. Somebody's riding a bicycle. Yes, the traffic's going to be blurred, but do you want that bicycle with the spokes blurred out, or do you want the spokes? If you want the level of detail, shoot faster. You got to shoot faster. And with the triangle of, you know, balancing your ISO and your shutter and your aperture, which I'll talk about, sometimes that's hard, especially when you got buck fever. Now, to me, it's not in focus here, but trust me, that's in focus. To me, it's all about the eyes. If I can't see the eyes, I'm probably not close enough, so that's one of my things. If I can't get the eyes where I can see any kind of detail in them, I'm not close enough to suit my purposes. I mean, you want to take a flock of flamingos taking off across, you know, the edge of the seashore, nobody cares about the eyes. Then you're taking a wildlife panorama, you're getting the action, that's fine. But if you're trying to get that subject, would you be happy if you were even in a studio trying to take a portrait of someone and you said, oh, wow, I got it composed properly, you know, rule of thirds. I mean, I got the head over about the right place. Color looks good. Auto white balance worked in this situation, but it's not in focus. So, you know, this is a better example when I'm getting to focus, and I can jump up here. For me, when I'm taking animals like this, if you focus on the nose, the eyes are going to be a little blurry. I always try to focus at the base of the eyes, top of the nose, and have the aperture set so that I've got a little bit of depth of field, because that's what I'm looking for. I don't care, typically, if this falls out of focus. That's not why you would want the photo. And here is another example of panning where you can see the background a little bit better. The clouds in the background look real creamy because I created the blur, but again, I wasn't shooting fast enough. Nice picture of a bird, body, not really a good picture to me, but it's kind of cool. I mean, it's a little abstract for my taste, but you know, it's okay. Composition, that's something that doesn't have to do with nature photography. Get your composition. right? If you say, oh, there's that deer about 10 seconds before, 30 seconds before that was standing here. I could have still got the rack, but it would have been obscured. It wasn't moving the way I wanted. I was afraid it would get in the bad light. I got out of my car, I walked down the road about 50 to 100 yards because I didn't want to spook it, and then I worked my way slowly back up with an angle, paying attention to where the sun was so that when I got the shot, when it did move a couple of inches, and it smiled at me, it's got all the teeth showing. You can't get that from most of your clients, okay? It was chewing is what it was doing, but you know, I got it composed. I cared more about the head than I did the tips of the rack, and again, these are cut off because of the slide. There's the actual photo's got more space. Yes, Bill, I created more head space on my portraits. And of course, you know, it's always good to me to include a little behavior, natural behavior of the animals. So what do ducks do? You've all seen ducks. They swim in the water, they get out, they go. So I could have taken the photo of the duck in the water. The light didn't change between that and this, but by waiting 2 or 3 minutes till it finished its swim and got out, I got a photo that I thought was a little more aesthetically pleasing because I saw it doing something instead of sitting there. And then, I think this is the last one of just my general statements. Here's a situation. These birds are called chuckers. They're actually a quail. Nobody who lives in the West likes them. Nobody who shoots wildlife in the West would stop to get this photo, but it was a day when nothing else looked good. I drove around for an hour and a half looking for anything. I would have shot magpies, but I couldn't find any magpies. So I knew there were some chuckers up by the visitor center of this Antelope Island State Park, but I wanted to do something to make it at least halfway interesting, so I crawled down into the rocks, got behind the rocks, and used the rocks to frame it. Why aren't they in focus? Because I didn't want you to see a photo of the rocks. This wasn't my landscape with a bird in the back. To me, the focus here was the bird. And then, every once in a while, you get that say cheese moment. So, this was taken in Jackson, Wyoming, a week ago last Saturday. It's not the same ram that I showed you before. Same species, totally different place, different state. I waited for these rams. We saw them about 250 yards out and could have said, oh, look, rams, click. The 400, the 600, the 1200, the 2500 millimeter, whenever they come out with it, would have shown you a couple of rams. I waited till they got up here. They were eventually coming to my side of the road. Why? Because I recognized the girls from the boys. I know these are boys because they got big curly horns, and I knew the little ones who didn't have the other big things were women. So I waited till the boys came to dance with the girls. And in the course of them coming around, behind them, the one on the left got a whiff of the girls and said, we're at the party. And that's when I took the photo. But it took me, I will tell you, I stood there and it was cold, so I got back in the car, but I stood there waiting for that shot for 30 or 40 minutes. And I got in the right place before they got there. Fortunately, it was kind of flat light, so it didn't matter which direction, but I knew what I wanted was to see them like this coming up on that herd. So I got a place, I got a little bit of height, I got out of the wind as best I could, and I waited for them to show up. So when you're doing nature, that's one of the things you got to do. In a studio, you just tell your subject to move. And of course, don't forget the cute factor, that's always good. There's puppies, kittens, you know. This is the one, that lamb came up and was licking the salt off of our car. So I had to take the next shot after that with my iPhone, and I hate to use my iPhone. Hate it. I probably have at least 10 pictures on my iPhone. I have a friend who's got 5,000, because that's what he uses. So I'm not going to sell you any or suggest any accessories for your iPhone to make your nature photography better, although there probably is something. But I knew I was putting it on Facebook, and you know, you can't forget the awe factor. Now, here's a really ugly, and I threw these in because this is, anybody know what this is? Tasmanian devil. Where do you think they're from? Tasmania, thank you. That was a tricky question, right? This one was in a wildlife park in outside of Hobart, Tasmania, which is it's an island in between Australia and New Zealand. They're really hard to find. I was told that it was virtually impossible, except in the dead of night, to ever see one in the wild. So this is one of the very few exceptions of photos I use tonight that aren't wild shots. I go to the zoo all the time. I use it to perfect my skills. I use it to learn things. I use it to practice. I would never pawn off, and none of the photos in that other room are zoo photos. So I think a national park is not a zoo. It's real hard to time them. This isn't the Disney safari train, so you have to go find them. This guy was hard enough to find even in the wildlife park because they gave him a large area and it was daytime and he didn't want to be around. How'd I get that shot? There was a huge school group on the front of the exhibit, and I knew that a nocturnal animal would not want to go play with the kids. So I walked all the way around to the other side, poked my camera through the trees, and waited for it to get PO'd at the kids and come out the back end. And he did, and he went, oh, there's a guy here too. And I got his photo. So I guess this is a paparazzi wildlife shot. And there is that's kind of that's kind of squashed on the screen. That's kind of your standard portrait. Okay, Annette, what's that profile? Come on, we're taking a class. What is that? Where are you? What is that? No, assuming that's a mannequin head. What's that view of the face? Sideways? Good thing Bill doesn't grade. It's a profile, right. Left profile, it's facing left. So that's a standard profile shot. What was important to me in all of this? That's what I cared about. It didn't take a whole lot to let the background fall out of focus because I was focused in so tight there. This starts to fall out of focus. But you get a lot of life by with the profile shot, you can pick up on an animal like this a lot of life. Because unlike deer and elk who shed their antlers, these guys keep them for life. So like the rings on a tree, you can see all the things it's done. There's chips out of it, there's cracks, all kinds of things. There's snow stuck to it as well. But it's a portrait, and I think it has a little bit of character just because of who it was. And he was about 7 or 8 yards away too. And talking about attitude, sometimes even lizards can give you a little attitude. That was the other shot from Australia, and I just threw it in to show you how good they could have been and how crappy they turned out. When I go back and look at it, look at this depth of field. I mean, I got stuff in front. I can see all the weeds in the back. I apparently didn't know how to edit, not that I do really anymore. And that eye's almost in focus. So that's the progression from 2009 until now. Sometimes you use the environment to create, man, we should pass that around and look at this. This is a wet fawn. This was taken July 4th, 9 o'clock in the morning in Michigan along Route 20, the day that a family member died. Sometimes you use photos, even of nature, to bring those events. Relative was in hospice, dying at home. I needed to get away from the environment. I drove down the road. I saw this field with, and you can't see them here, but there's white flowers, and there were little the dew webs and things. So I got out of the car and I walked across to do that, and the fawn got up. Wet ears, semi-translucent. It's still wet from lying down in the weeds, and it was looking back going, what do you want? So sometimes you can just use nature photography the same way you would your family portraits. And then eagles, they're kind of my thing. Wish we had more. When I went to Mississippi a few weeks ago, there were only 1,100 or 1,200. But they were over where that woman shot them on the other side of the river, and to me that wasn't good enough. This is probably cropped about half. I shot this from 35 yards with a 500 millimeter lens. So this image took up about half of my sensor, half of the frame. But you need to find something. Now there's no object to what it's doing. I mean, you can't see what that eagle's about to grab. And the reason I cropped it in the original was it was a dead carp. So it wasn't the most photogenic thing. This gray frozen carp that had already been hit by some other eagles. But waiting for the moment, and it was snowing pretty hard. I can see the snow in it. Problem with white balance, shooting early, that's going to look blue normally. So we'll talk about white balance, what you do about getting it. But wait for the shot till it opens the talons. Wait till it's going to do something, so there's an anticipation to this shot that you might not have otherwise got. So you can shoot an animal, you go, oh, look, bird, click, and go. Or you can wait, let nature take its course, and get that photo. Here's one from a few weeks ago. This was out on the Mississippi. Here's one where the water's coming off. The eagle came down, brushed against the water. There's water splashed up by the tail. It's dripping off the talons because it came in dredging through. And I can tell a lot because I pay attention to nature. Eagles always fish into the wind. Same way aircraft land on aircraft carriers. They need the lift. Ospreys fly over the fish, fold their wings, and drop like a pelican, and they can take off because they only weigh 6 pounds. This bird weighs 12, 14 pounds, and I've seen photos, I haven't seen them in person, grabbing a fish so big that they had to swim it back to shore because they don't have any lift. These are big birds. So it happens to be a really tiny, tiny fish it's going for. In the dams in the Mississippi, what happens is the shad come over the rollers in the dams, and they go, ugh, and they get flustered, and they float around, and they swim sideways. And so the eagles, who are some of the laziest predators on the planet, they would eat roadkill if they didn't have to go out and catch fish. But the buzzards usually chase them off. But it was coming in, it saw this. I know the wind was over my shoulder. I know it was going into its face. I was able to be in the place where I used the wind along with the light on that day to position myself and just hope that the birds would come in that direction. And then lastly, just a couple of things just about macro photography, then we'll get into talking about some of the techniques, because you got the little jury alt tour. Macro to me gets up close. I really wish I'd thrown a photo on. I have the very first macro shot I ever took, the first one I can call a macro shot. I mean, probably like Viewminder, I could put your camera there and said that was a macro, but first macro photograph I ever took, I got the Canon 100 millimeter, the first one, and I knew enough that I could chase bees and dragonflies all day long, and I'd be taking butt shots if I was lucky. So because of the background growing up, I went to Ryerson Preserve up off of between Deerfield and Half Day Road in Lincolnshire. I found a nice semi-sunny little plat. I took my tripod, my cable release, we'll talk about cable release, and my camera, and I aimed at 2 likely suspect bushes. And I sat there and meditated for about 20 or 30 minutes until a dragonfly obliged and came in facing the other way, taken in the sun. Lots of things wrong with the shot, but I'm proud of the fact that I got the macro shot. And it's still pretty good by most standards for dragonflies. So to me, macro also means it's magnified. You're not only close, but you're getting inside, if you will, the subject. And typically, but not always, you've got singular subjects. So these are what I'd consider macro shots. They were all taken a different way. This one was a conventional macro lens. I can tell because there's no depth of field to most macro lenses. So the pistol on each side with the pollen is relatively in focus, or better there. But this is not. The stamen in the middle is not. This one was taken probably not wide open at all, probably closed down a fair amount, and it actually looks like I might have tried to use flash on it. The reason I know it wasn't is you can see a lot of the detail in the background. So this was not a macro lens. This was, I'm going to guess, that this might have been that 28-300. And that one on the top, Flower and Garden Show, so that's my other captive, 70-200. Handheld, just using the compressing ability of a telephoto, and probably shot it nearly wide open. That's a 2.8 or f4, so that I blur the background of what was a single bouquet. So instead of a bouquet of flowers, I got the ones in the front plane of focus and left the others behind. Good things to know if you're a wedding photographer, right? You want to take a picture of the two rings, or you want to take a picture of the table they're sitting on, right? To me, the classic macro is not taking a close picture, but getting inside the comfort level. You know, everybody's got that zone of personal space. If you're good at taking a macro, you invade that space. So here's a really kind of pretty butterfly, but until you get real close, you don't realize they have eyes like this. And you get real close in them. But again, severely narrow depth of field, I aim for the eyes. Remember I said, it's all about the eyes. I got a little bit of the proboscis. I got a little bit in focus of the antennae, because they happen to be in the same plane, but the front of the legs, the kind of hairy chin, if you will, underneath, and the wings all go out of focus. There's ways to get around that. We'll talk about that. You could make this completely in focus and still be technically taking a macro. But to me, that's the kind of shots. One of the other things about macro, and it depends on the equipment you're using, is the ability to multiply. So this is one where I used a close-up adapter, Canon 250M, I think it is. It's screwed onto your lens, and it magnifies the photo. This was, I'm sure, a handheld shot of a moving bee, but I threw it in here to suggest that you can really, get a lot of magnification when you're taking macro and make things bigger than life. To me, the best macros are the ones where you isolate a single subject and have people think about the layers within the layers within the layers of the photograph. So think of a street photograph you might take. So you've got an urban environment, you've got the street, you've got people walking back and forth, so they're in the front of your view as well as going in the back, but you're trying to catch the woman on the phone or the street musician somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of layers to that photograph. You can start, somebody like Nima can start dissecting that and say, look at the story behind this. So here you've got the extreme bokeh on the background, bokeh on the front of the flower. Really the focus is the little tiny flowers in the middle. Usually when I'm speaking, I leave the microphone off because I do this a lot. But to me, that photo was not about the white flower, it was about the little flowers on the interior. And we'll talk about how you get some of that as well. Another story. I found out long after I took this photo, that is not a hornet. No, that is not a wasp, and that is not a hornet. I found that out because I posted that photo, I think on Flickr, and a professor in Australia reached out to me and said he had never seen those two species together, and it was amazing because they aren't what they look like. Both of them are masking other species, but they happen to interact. That was my first published photo. It's in a textbook in Australia. So you have to read Australian, I guess, to know. No, I don't. I have a copy of the book. That's what I charged for it, was give me credit and send me a copy of the book. This photo, again, randomly taken, wait for the opportunity, find it. This was the day my mother died. Rushed with a stroke the afternoon before, spent the night in the hospital, had to take my dad home so he could get some rest, went to his house. Somebody had given him a bunch of grapes. They were sitting on the porch, and every winged animal from miles away was feasting on those. So I sprayed a lot of deadly chemicals on them, dragged the box across the street, and when I came back, there were still a few survivors, and I saw these two. So if you're gonna go to the hospital to stay with your mom, make sure you take a nice tripod and a good head. So I got those out of my car, set them up on the porch, and waited until they interacted and the photo of the two species. So again, one of those just fortuitous moments waiting for something to happen. And sometimes your macro can be abstract. I posted this photo on Facebook and I said, guess what I am? And it took like 39 guesses. And I'm like, really? Because it told you I was at the alligator farm. But it's okay. There's some slow people on Facebook. So let's talk about some basic techniques. And I call them basic photographic techniques, not basic nature techniques, because I don't think there's anything on here that you cannot apply to the kind of photography you do. I go with it. I'm going to ask you to hit the button in a second. Then I stay out of the light for a minute. So, focus, 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 focus. There's different ways to focus. There's only one way to achieve focus, but there's different ways to try to get closer to it. And using light. You can take one of those with you, but you better take a bunch of extension cords, because most of the places I shoot, you're not that. You may be close to the animals, but you're not that close to a 110 outlet. There's an exception. I'm going to sell something for you, Bill. Where are you? He left. Bill? He did. He left. Son of a gun. All right. ProPhoto makes a really, really expensive, all-in-one, battery-operated B1 strobe. I'm going to get one. You can take your alien bees out there and you can haul a battery pack if you want, and you can trudge through. A lot of times to get those photos, I'm walking 1 to 3 miles. I don't think I want to carry the battery. And a lot of the places I go are wet to get to them, so I'm wearing rubber boots, and I think the little wheelie cart isn't going to do you a whole lot of good. But there's still light. The light you shoot with in nature is typically of 2 sources. You can add the third. You can bring light. And I'm going to show you a couple of pieces, and we'll talk about what they can do for you. But the light you get is the light of the sky, which is largely reflected. It's either reflected off the atmosphere, it's reflected off the clouds, or it's reflected off some other natural part of your environment, or the sun itself. So that's the sun, but there's light other places in here that aren't directly in the sun because that light's been reflected and bounced around. So when you're trying to figure out with your subjects, this is why I like to talk to people at zoos, because the animals are usually in a really bad place to photograph them. Up against a fence, in the shade, but it's not shade because they got some sunlight in their face and it's going to be an awful photo. So I tried to talk about trying to control the light. Wait till they get all the way in the shade, wait till they get in the sun, then try to control it. You can control direct sunlight by using your aperture, you know, and make a better picture out of what you got. To me, I love being out in the morning. Animals are more active in the beginning light than they are generally in the fading light. Deer are diurnal, means they have 2 active periods during the day. They get up really what's before dawn for us, but they're still milling around eating. So when you decide to get up and it starts to get light, and I'm not talking about the middle of the summer, I'm talking about like now, they're still going to be up and around. But they may not start moving again at night until after it's dark, because the way that cycle works for them. So I love using the morning. Not so much the blue hour, because you got to adjust for it, but I like the golden hour. Depth of field, you all know, I'm going to talk again about getting close and staying low. And so we'll talk about a couple of things about focusing. Imagine that's a person, right? You all got to kiss a bunch of frogs to get a prince, come on. So I look for the frogs. I saw a photo very similar to this coming out of the airport today. I can't remember who it was for. It was some huge consulting company, and they had a photo like this. And both of the eyes were out of focus. And I was like, I'm going to show them a good photo tonight. I got to go back and figure out what company that is. But shame on them. This is just right out of the camera on Facebook, so I would have taken the little stick thing out. This has a lot of things going for it. Number one, it's get low, because if I wasn't lying on my belly, it was only because this frog was up on a rock, so I was at least hunched way down. I was probably shooting off some kind of support because I didn't want to induce blur by hand holding a telephoto, but I wanted these eyes, and unlike some animals, these have eyes out here. So if I aim here, they're both going to be out of focus, and that's what the poster in the airport had. So I'm sure I aimed right about in here to get the focus I wanted. And a whole frog with a whole rock wasn't that interesting, so once I secured the focus, I probably opened it up and adjusted my ISO down as low as I could and balanced it so that I could achieve a photo of the frog's eyes, not a photo of the frog. So when you're doing people, to me it's all about the eyes. You may think it's all about the ear, so whatever you want to focus on, go ahead and do it. Now let's talk about the difference between focus and focus, okay? Tack sharp, people talk about tack sharp focus. And I'll tell you that if you hold, well, you all know what camera looks like, I don't have to get one. If you hold your camera and you hold the button halfway down, the cameras are so smart today that they make really good guesses for you, but it's still a guess. It is the approximate acceptable focus is what the camera is going to do, and especially on professional mode, I suspect. So if you want this photo, and this frog wasn't going anywhere, and if I was going back to do it again, I'd probably do it correctly because now I've had Bill's class. Actually, I've had about half of his class. I'm going to have to take it over again. I would set up the tripod, I would pull up live view, and I would manually focus that shot. Along the same lines, and it's probably on the next slide here on focus, is you have a lot of choices on your DSLRs these days. I'm going to use all the points. Oh, I got a camera with 910 points. I'm going to use them all. All that does is let the camera make more guesses. If I want that eye, then I want single spot focus. I want to run it up on the inside of the viewfinder till it's laying on that eye, and then recompose. Or, and this makes more sense, move the composition where you want it first, and then toggle the focus point afterwards. You can do that a whole lot easier looking at the back screen. And especially when you're doing macro shots, it's so hard. You know, half of the shots you should be taking, you're lying down on the ground. You've got to get a tripod that doesn't have a center mount in it, because otherwise you never get low enough. When we talk about gear, that center mount, you paid a lot of money to just buy a monopod with legs, because it's up there waving around like this. So if you want to get low and you want to be solid, you want that middle out, you want to spread it out, you want to be low. You're not going to be able to see well enough, trust me, especially if you're wearing glasses, you're not going to be able to see anything unless you can use the back. Tripods. The tripod will keep it steady. Bill said this a couple of times. I've said it, but I'm going to give him credit for it. Why do you spend $2,000 on a camera and $49 on something to hold it? If you bought the camera, buy a $49 camera, put it on a good tripod. Okay, that's why they sell tripod mounts for these. Because you'll take a better photo on a tripod with this than you will with your expensive DSLR trying to hand hold it as you walk through the weeds. I guarantee it. Now, you can't sell them anything, they're going to the Verizon store. Sorry, Bill. Okay, unless you got a bunch of little tripods. Be still, that's obvious. Good technique on your shutter, not so obvious. I know there's some classically trained professional photographers. I'm just going to randomly pick one. David Sim. What's the number one thing to do when you're depressing the shutter? Or the number one thing to not do when you're depressing the shutter to get a shot? Huh? Buck fever, right? Woo, I got the shot. Woo, I got the shot. Woo. So when I'm going like this, if I don't have it in focus, then all I've done is bang, bang, bang. And especially when you're shooting a lens this long, every little bit, okay? That's why wide angle is easier to focus and hold. Because the tolerance, you ever play that game? Was it Snap the Whip or Crack the Whip when you're kids, right? Everybody joins hands in the playground. Okay, I went to Catholic school, what can I tell you? You know, you run around, but we didn't have toys. So you run around in the playground and the last one in line is going, whoa, 62 miles an hour and goes crashing into the mud and gets a gash and whatever. Because the further out, if you're doing science, the further out that you're moving that thing, there's a lot more vibration. So the longer the lens, a tiny bit of vibration translates into a lot of movement. So your technique, roll over the shutter. For the same reason, can you hit that? It's not on this slide, but it's on another one. I'm going to give you an advance back button focus. I started doing it about a year ago. Huge advocate. Reason, when you're holding, especially with moving wildlife, when you're holding that shutter button halfway down and trying to keep focus, accidentally sometimes it goes click, and it's like, now I got to go do it again. If you got back button focus, hold it down. Just hold it down. Follow your target. Use the AI focus. Hold it down. You get into focus, then you've got the front. And you can roll over it. Nature photographers like Rick Sammons, Moose Peterson, they roll, they roll, they roll. They say the best way is when you're shooting people is defy them to see you depress the shutter. Those same techniques work in the wild. Even though the bird doesn't know to watch your shutter finger, the pictures will be better if you can squeeze off the shot and not bang off the shot. Macro live view I talked about. AF assist on your camera generally gives you just an acceptable level. So I talked about this. The last thing I'm going to talk about on this, I got to look at I've got goodie bags. Let me see if I got anything in here. Nope. Focus calibration. Doesn't do you much good on your wide angle, your 14 millimeter, 2470. But if you have a telephoto, 7200 on up, I would, or was it 8400 on the Nikon? What is the, right? That's kind of a mid-level telephoto. Consider focus calibration, because they go to the factory and they build that lens. And they go to a different factory on a different day with a different bunch of underpaid, unlicensed, underage people building your body. And when you put them together, you hope they're the same. They're not going to be the same. They're going to be in that acceptable level. I saw a huge difference the first time I did this. There's like a lens align kit you can get. There's some with software and without. You set up the target on a tripod, because it doesn't move then. You set up your camera at a known distance on a tripod. You shoot at the target. The software will then analyze the acceptable front and back focus points, and you can do micro lens adjustments, focus adjustments inside most DSLRs today. Huge, huge difference when you do it. All right, using the light. I said blue hour, not so good for landscapes. There was a little blue hour going on the snowy peak I had at the back of, okay, good. On the snowy peak I had on the cover photo for the presentation, sometimes when you've got nothing but blue sky and snow and clouds, you're going to have trouble getting white balance anyway. So it's like, which piece do I want to actually look good? Because they're all reflecting off one another and they're just all on that blue spectrum and you can't help it. But you don't have to assist it by shooting before it's light out. I've shot with flash before you really get to the golden hour. It does nasty things to animals' eyes. There is a way to subtly use flash. There's a way to use it filtered so that you can pick up some light that you need. But again, you're trying to raise the ambient light level then. You're not really trying to blow flash into the eyes. I love golden hour. To me, it's sublime. The animals light up. You get all the color. And to me, it feels better than during the day, which is probably the same when you're taking photos of people, unless you're trying to do something very specific, kind of a model look, fashion look. Find the light. I talked about those rams where I knew where they were going to be. So you don't shoot where they are, you shoot where they're going to be. So I went to where they were, and one of the things to look at is what time of day is it, where's it going to be? So when I went to Sunday to Orlando and went over by Cape Canaveral and went to the wildlife refuge, I didn't look for the birds first, I looked there first. And I said, okay, everything on the left side of the road won't matter. I got to look on the right, because the light was going to be horrible on that side. When the light gets flat, especially with landscapes, they get really boring, because what makes an interesting photograph is the shadows. Not the light, but the shadows that you create. So if you create interesting shadows, you've created an interesting photo, and especially with landscapes, because by nature, by the very nature of what they are, you get better shots when the light isn't flat. So that means early and late, not at noon. Contrasting colors will help you with some drama. This on a daffodil would still be a really big bee, like a bee movie bee, like Attack of the Killer Bees. But when you shoot it on a coneflower that's got some different color, it really kind of brings out and helps you pay attention. Last thing is the white balance. Oh yeah, I got my remote there. That white balance is key. When I was shooting the eagles, when I was shooting these rams, because it was early light, very little contrast, no sun gonna come up at all for hours if it did at all. On the back of your, at least on my camera, because it's a Canon, you can adjust your white balance point. And I moved on the little graph the white balance point over to a +4 early, then back to about a +2, and then by 10 or 11 o'clock, I could let the auto white balance, because the auto white balance is trying to guess, and it's going, that's white, that's white, that's white. I'll make them all gray. So what's it look like? It looks blue-gray in your picture. That's not what the eagle's head looks like, that's not what the snow looks like. So the problem of shooting a black dog in a snowstorm or a cotton ball in a cave is just exacerbated when there isn't enough contrast between them for the camera to even make a guess. So sometimes you got to step up so you can hit that. Here's an example. Here's the same, well, it's the same place, okay? It's not the same shot. About an hour to an hour and a half in between these shots. This was with Richard Burnaby. This is called Delicate Arch. It's one of the most iconic shots, which is how we explain why we had to walk a mile and a half each way to do it. It's the iconic shot. Oh, nice. It's uphill both ways, Jack. Which it was. I don't know how it can be uphill both ways, but I swear to God it was. So we walk up in the afternoon. This was November. There's snow in the background. Exposed for this. There's something about both of these shots that's not apparent from them, which is that sun's over here. I had a polarizer on my camera. This was 2470, probably at about 50 millimeter, maybe a little, maybe 40 millimeter, because I wanted the arch. I didn't want the whole valley. I didn't want a picture of a little rock formation in the middle of a valley. I wanted the formation that we paid the good money and was told it was worth the walk. So I shoot that, but over here, the light's a lot harsher. It's earlier in the afternoon. You get strong shadows. You're getting a real sharp definition between the light and the dark. There's a whole thing about focus on this that this be a good example to talk about. If I wanted those mountains in focus, which they would be if this wasn't a projector, I want those mountains in focus, I'm gonna focus on this rock. Because when you're using the wide angle, there's a point beyond which everything is infinity and everything is in focus. And if I didn't have that rock in the way and I tried to focus on the mountains, it's extremely difficult to get focus because the camera is not that good, it's not as good as your eye, to go out and say, what is that, 50 miles, 60 miles? Yeah, that's the right spot. So find something you can throw a rock at, and that was a joke, and find a rock you can throw something toward. How's that? We were way up. I mean, we were like mountain goats, okay? So I'm standing here and I'm leaning back and my tripod is tilted back because if I had stood straight up, I know I would have fallen about 200 feet down. And one of the guys with us, somebody dropped their lens cap and I went for a while. And he goes, oh, I'll get it. And he goes down the front. And I'm like, I don't even want to go backwards on a roller coaster and this guy's running down the face of a mountain. But he had to climb back up, so that was his problem. But I'd rather have this photo, getting back to the point. The sunlight, these are red rocks, they pop when you get that late sun. So to me, and one of these is back on the wall, there's a big difference in the same shot, just in a little bit of time of day. Okay, so let's talk about depth of field. Bad photo, but it was to talk about one of the hardest things to do, especially in the macro world, to maintain depth of field. So this is you can't see it here, that's why I said it's a bad shot. You know, it's that long, right? I'm shooting from the front. The back, even if it was skewed at an angle, is gonna be out of focus almost all the time. If it is in focus, I'm probably shooting at f16 or f22, and I got all those weeds there. So there's things you need to do to control depth of field, deciding what you want a picture of. If you want a landscape, you want big numbers. Those rocks in the last picture was probably f16 to f22. Why? Because I want infinity. I want sharpness in the back. So when you have an open aperture, you get a really narrow depth of field. an open aperture on a macro is the worst thing you can do. The Canon 65 millimeter, I think, they have a manual focus lens that actually goes to 5:1 ratio. At 5:1, the depth of field is something like, I want to say 3/8 of an inch. I don't know what you're going to shoot that you can get front to back in 3/8 of an inch. Ants, but you can't even take a picture. You can't put a nickel down and take a picture from the front edge to the back edge of the nickel and have it in focus. So that's extremely narrow depth of field. So when you're trying to decide what camera equipment to take with you, wide angle or I say zoom, but I mean the wide zoom, okay? Your kit lenses are going to give you the best sharpness to infinity. That's why when you bought the cheap little cameras and the little paper boxes with 24 exposures that you buy at the resort because you bring a camera and you got to go out and take it, and they're all in focus. You know why? Because it's a wide angle. So you take it out of the box and you aim it and then you drop it off at Walgreens and you get pictures and you say, geez, they're all in focus. I mean, the photos suck, but boy, they're all sharp. So that's what you get. The more you go to macro, which is really the extreme end of telephoto, you're going to get very shallow. And I've got something to illustrate this, I think. Yes, this is a lens. I don't know what lens it is. I borrowed this for educational purposes from the web. Here's the same lens. That's called 50 millimeters. One of the things you need to understand about lenses, and you should have learned way before today, is that when you aim a lens and focus it, it doesn't focus from here to here to here to here. There is one single point. It's glass. It's physics. The angles come together and there's a point, an intersection that says that's where critical focus is. Everything in front of that is out of focus and everything behind it is out of focus, but our eyes can tolerate that. Generally speaking, your eyes can tolerate 1/3 of the distance in front of the critical focus as being pretty good and 2/3 behind it as being pretty good. So if you're trying to take a subject and you're trying to get more of it to be in that acceptable range to the human eye, to your customer's eye maybe sometimes, here's wide open, f1.8. 20 feet, they're saying, is the point of optimum focus. The depth of field is the light shaded area. Can you see? It's just a little bit in front of 20 feet. And I'm going to say it goes to maybe 22 or 23 feet. So it's like 18 to 23 feet. That's okay. Move it to 5.6. They always say the sweet spot of the lens is 2 or 3 stops above wide open. So in here, the 5.6. Now I've extended the apparent depth of field, because depth of field doesn't mean it's in focus. That's just your limit, to about 17 on the front end maybe, and almost 30 on the back. Now I close that down to f16, and I go from, I'm going to call it 15 to 38. That's 28 feet. There's nothing I'm going to take a picture of. I mean, I've seen some big animals, but we live about 100,000 years too late for the really big ones. So I think that depth of field will pretty much nail anything I'm going to see. Okay, grizzly bears, deer, coyotes, your neighbor's dog, whatever. You want that depth of field, shoot higher. And of course, we don't have time to go into all that today, but how do you shoot higher? It's a balance, right? Unless you got artificial light, if you're moving your aperture, you got to decrease typically your shutter, your shutter, yeah. See, I said it right. Yeah, the shutter speed. I've been doing nothing but walking around and talking to people for 3 days. I forgot where I was. So yeah, when you do that, by the way, ISO is the third piece, but ISO doesn't help you a lot. It does outside sort of, because you can't control the other light, but ISO is like the balance of water in your pool. When you raise ISO, it raises the exposure for absolutely everything. And you usually don't want a picture of absolutely everything. That's a tourist photo. That's a snapshot from the bus. So I try to keep ISO as low as possible to reduce grain. Sometimes you want to go ahead and jack it up, like shooting those eagles. I want shutter speed, I'll sacrifice noise. So I want to shoot those in 1/1000th of a second, and if there's no available light, then I'm jacking it up to, maybe auto ISO and seeing it at 1600 or even 2500 on a relatively sunny day, because I'm sacrificing and trading. But generally speaking, when you do this, you get much better depth of field when you're down. So when we get to landscape photography, What do you want to do? You want to close down. All right, I'm going to zoom through this and talk about gear for a few minutes and take some questions. So I said one of the important things is get close. I told you the story about the lady who told me her pictures were terrible. I suspect after I talked to her, she didn't go back and demand a refund from CALUMET, but I can't tell you that wasn't true. To me, if I can't see not only the eyes, but the eye color, personally, I'm not close enough. Maybe you're close enough. That bear's 100 yards, it's good. Blue eyes, I don't care. But to me, I want to be able to see because I want to get as much texture, as much of the life, if you will. And this happens to be also an example of capturing the moment because I could have taken the picture, hey, look, heron. Click and moved. I found a spot, I saw the heron was fishing, set up my tripod, sat in the weeds, up over my head, and waited until it did something interesting, which in this case was catching a whopper 1-inch fish. I have a photo of a blue heron spearing a squirrel and carrying it along. It had one beak through the hindquarters and one beak behind the head, and it had just gone out in the weeds and got it, and it was carrying it. I've seen them with really big stuff. In Salt Lake, I saw a picture of somebody, it had to have a 24-inch carp and a blue heron like this, and you know how big they are. I mean, I don't know what it was going to do with it. Wasn't going to toss it in the air and swallow it, but it caught it. So now what you going to do with it? When I say get close, I put a hint there. Mountains don't move. Also, flowers don't move, trees don't move. Most stuff doesn't move. And a lot of times, even the animals don't move, if you're careful. So don't buy bigger glass. Don't spend the money on a lens. Just get close. Your kit lenses will take great shots. I got my two granddaughters kit lenses, the little T3Is or T2Is or whatever it was a few years ago, and they got the 1855 in it. And they went out in the woods, they followed me around, they took wonderful shots. You know why? Because they're kids. So they were already down here. And they weren't afraid to get dirty. And they went over here. And they went, click. And they got great shots. So you go through a trail that has a path. They want you to stay on the path, but you can get close to the edge. So get into the flowers, get into the trees. Stop being a tourist. Here's an example of what I talked about before. Now again, this is cropped by nature for the snapshots in the slide presentation, but these are full, this is full frame on the 1DX from my trip in mid-January. So imagine that's the full frame 35. So I haven't touched the image other than the fact that it's cut off in here. Here's how most people would take that photo. Oh, I want that bird. Bang. That's great focus. I pulled that up. I mean, that's a nice shot. That's an immature eagle eating a bird. I mean, a fish. But this is what I got sometime in the same time period because the sky's about the same and the light's about the same. This is what filled up the frame. This was probably 30+% of my sensor. So when you get closer, you have more creative opportunities. You don't have much choice on this except to go into Lightroom and drag all your little sliders way up and do this and then blow it up and say, wow, that looks okay on Facebook, but I sure don't want to make a 4x6 out of it because it gets fuzzy on the edges. It's there, but you've stretched the limits of your sensor. You take this, I crop down to it, I still probably print an 11x14. You won't notice the difference. So get close when you can. Sometimes you can't. Get low, same thing I just talked about with the granddaughters. Take a picture of a flower from here. When do you think flowers are the prettiest? When you see a field of them blooming, right? What angle have you got when you see the field? You're on the side. So why did you walk up to it and go, oh, that's a really nice tulip? You know what a tulip looks like? It looks like that. Get down below it, get the light coming through it, get some of the three-dimensionality of it. Life grows from the ground up. Get down to the ground. It'll make a difference in what your photos look like. Here's an example. Early December, Virginia, Manassas State Park. I have an office in Manassas, Virginia. I had to be someplace. It was an okay day. It was probably at least 40 degrees, which makes it a heat wave like we had. But you know, it was nice enough. It was cloudy, so it was a great day for photography. I walked down this path, and it turns out that wasn't where I want to go because it was about 6 miles to get back. But be that as it may, Always take water when you don't know where you're going. I didn't, but there were dirty streams, no. So I'm walking down this path and, I mean, that's an okay, you know, forget this for a moment. We've seen that. That's a woods, it's got weeds. For the hell of it, because there's a woman walking in the back of this frame, I waited till she left, and she was dawdling, and I didn't want to wait any longer. So I just took the camera and I set it down on the ground. Whatever, I was 7,200 maybe. I wanted to carry one lens, so probably 7,200. Put it down on the ground, put a little rock or stick or something under it to balance it. Got down on my hands and knees, put it in live view to see what I was looking at. Found some focus, put down a 2-second delay, and I stood out of the way. I think this is a much more interesting photo. You can disagree, because there's something about that instead of, hey, here's a picture of a road. Cool. So use getting low to get your story. Crocus, by the way, only grow this tall, so if you want to shoot them from above, you're really missing out. Capture the moment, the last thing before I talk about gear. We were coming home from Grand Tetons a week ago, Sunday. 75 miles an hour, remember that black and white of the elk coming down? We saw the elk coming down. Now, I'm going to tell you guys because we're friends and you're not going to tell anyone else, right? It turned out there was a wildlife refuge and they had hay for them. So the reason they came down from the mountain is because they were feeding them in the winter. But you can't tell it here. It looks natural here. They were actually in wild area. I mean, when we photographed them, they were just coming down to a place where the DNR had put hay out. Could have taken a bunch of pictures of individual elk, a line of elk, whatever. Stayed a while, waited to see what would happen. Saw two bulls get a little too close to each other. Surrounded by 50 or 100 cows, I'm thinking maybe. Took about 10 minutes before the younger one came around and started pushing the bigger one. The older one's the one on the left, a little bit mangier, darker, and it has the bigger rack. They're all going to lose their antlers, but the little one came over and did it again. Started shoving at the, I'll just put this in my pocket. And so you wait around. So we waited I couldn't create the moment, I waited for the moment. I think it's a much more compelling photo than a picture of an elk on a mountain. And sometimes you can't control anything. This was February last year, that same place, Antelope Island. There's really great opportunities for wildlife in and near Salt Lake City. So if you're thinking about moving out of this wonderful environment, they got snow, but it doesn't stick around a lot. But this particular day, the storm had come in, it was blowing sideways, there was no visibility. The raw image of that bison, you couldn't even see the bison. I saw it from us driving. I stopped, I made the guys wait. I walked down off to where I thought it was still a safe distance, and I composed this so that I had the wind blowing behind me toward it instead of across, because across too much snow would have been there, and I got a composition. I think it's a great shot. This bison is completely encrusted with snow. Only his eyes and his nostrils were free, because that's where the warmth and the moisture was. And you could see the breath coming out of him, and he was just going about his thing. I'm eating. So cold buffet that day, and if you shoot weddings, you can still get engagement shots. See, you just go to the Galapagos and there you go. So just a situation. You're lucky in the Galapagos. I was fortunate enough to go a couple of years ago. You can get a lot closer than that. You're not supposed to, but if you stand still and the sea lion comes up and nuzzles you, then that's not considered intruding on them. And I got some great shots from very close distance. So let's talk about some gear. Y'all got a camera. I don't care what camera you got. You don't need the expensive camera to do this. Yes, I do, because I'm a fanatic. I got to have the gear. I have 3 types of bags with me, just carrying junk to show you for a minute. And I got 6 more back at the studio if anybody wants to make a deal on huge backpacks that I discovered don't fit in the overhead of small planes. I got some brand new ones, still have the tags on them. Tripod or monopod. Sometimes a monopod is what you got to use. I went to the Galapagos and took 6,000 photos and couldn't take a tripod on the islands. It wasn't allowed. So I created a tripod right here. 1 foot monopod. strap around my neck, holding it like this, and I created the other two legs. And we got some really nice photos as a result of it, a couple of them on the wall. I said, get a good tripod. Get something sturdy. I don't care if you get aluminum or steel, but you got to carry it. The newer ones, the graphite, the boron, are extremely light. You go to Really Right. If you think you're paying too much for a tripod here, go to the Really Right Stuff website, and then you'll come back and love the stuff they have on the floor here. I'm just telling you. I mean, it's similar enough for 97% of you, okay? But I'd suggest, I've seen the ones they sell. Well, Wolf Photo's not around, but the kind of stuff they sell at most of the camera departments, Best Buy or whatever, don't do that. You want to put a video camera on, you want to take family birthdays, go for it. You want to walk around, you want to have it be dependable, you want it to hold up and be there for the kind of equipment you might someday put on it, spend some money. I use the Really Right Stuff ball heads. I don't know where they are, but I got one. Other people sell them, similar. There we go. I mean, that's $375. So it's like anything, you know. You can buy a Chevy and it'll get you to work, but some people still buy Ferraris and Porsches. I thought this was an extravagance, but so many of the pros were using Really Right Stuff until I got it, and I said, now I know why. My camera's got the Really Right Stuff L-shaped bracket, so when I've got this on the tripod, set it down horizontally, turn it vertically, don't have to mess. I make this level, and then I can take my shots with the camera. So the ball head or a gimbal mount, if you don't know what a gimbal mount is, it's that thing that lets you swing all over the place. Let's see if I can get my camera. I'm blind from, so I can't find the zipper. There we go. So there's the Really Right Stuff plate. Fits on like that. Take it off, put it on like that. I've got Black Rapid, got the adapting plate for it that fits on the Black Rapid. So I put that on. This doesn't fail, doesn't fall. And one of the problems with the Black Rapid straps is screwing that into the ferrule on the bottom of your camera and trying to strip it out. So here you've got a bracket that's attached multiple spots. Walk around with that all day. Put the 8-pound lens on it, still walk around with it all day. Except you have bruises, no. Circular polarizer, don't have time to talk about when to use it, but don't use it when you aim into the sun. It's for right angles. Extension tubes. Anybody know the difference between an extension tube and a tele-extender? Teleconverter? Okay, you're just gonna make me tell you. Okay, fine. Ugh. They call this the tele-extender. Here's the 2X from Canon. It's got optics in it. There's glass. This doesn't happen to work with the lens I've got because it's already got the tele-extender built in. This comes in a 1.4 and a 2.0, so it will double or 1.5 times. If you shoot a crop sensor lens, multiply it times the other number. With the Series 2, you can screw them together, put two 2X or a 1.4 and a 2X together, and keep multiplying, and then you're standing there doing the math with a crop sensor going, let's see, 400 millimeter times 1.4 is 560, times 2 is 1120, times 1.6, and then you stop doing the math and say it's a lot. The difference is, so this lets you see further. The difference is, and I'm showing this to you because you can use your kit stuff and make it perform like better stuff by using a few of these things. Unfortunately, the Canon stuff, I don't know about Nikon, really only works with a certain series of lenses, so make sure that's the lens you got. Difference with an extension tube, magic, there's no glass. It's got the electronics. What this allows you to do is take a lens that has a minimum focusing distance that isn't close enough, put this on it. They come in 12s, 25s. There's a couple different sizes generally. Like Kenko makes some. I'm sure he's got several brands. Put this in here, not on the end. Put it against the body, put the lens back on. There's no glass so it doesn't distort the image, but it lets you move closer. So when I said get closer, use your 18 to 55 and get right there and still use the 55, right? You're making your 55 act like maybe an 80 millimeter because you got closer, you magnified by decreasing the distance. And I'm gonna tear this off again. Okay. They sell these here. Okay. Cleaning cloths. The rocket blower, I know they got them on a shelf. When you get out, you're gonna get dirty. No question about it. Take something to clean it off. I took a bunch of shots in Moab. I got one back there of a sunrise. We walked out at 5:30 in the morning. It was dark in November. We set up our cameras. We knew where we were, used our little headlights and adjusted the camera. When it started getting pre-dawn, we took a little test shot for exposure against the rock in front of us, and we said, we're good. Then the sun came up, and the sun comes, click, 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 and then the sun's gone behind the rock. And that's your shot, that's it. And when you look at it and discover that there's dust on the lens because you had it exposed for an hour and a half waiting for the sun to come up, you're gonna be a little upset. So now I clean right, but take a cleaning cloth, microfiber, take a rocket blower, whatever. Take a flashlight with you. I carry a little headlight one, but when I'm shooting stars at night sometimes, I don't want all that light, so I'll carry a little pen light. A Leatherman tool, can't take it on a plane, but you can carry it around with you because you might want to do something. You might have a flower that you want to get around, and it's got that one leaf in the way. Whoops, no it's not. No, you're not supposed to do that. It's pruning. Didn't cut it, just pruned it. What's better is take alligator clips and clip it out of the way and then take your picture and let it go back. Some kind of weather cover, that applies if you're going to shoot a sporting event. You're shooting your kid at soccer. Take something to protect your camera. Take the manual. How many people carry the manual with you when you go? Oh, that's a lot more, I don't. Okay, but you should, it's a really good idea. Yeah, I know. On my iPad, I have the PDF version of my manuals. Cable release, I'm not gonna go dig it up because I can't see. Memory card holder, take extra memory cards. Don't stick them in your pocket. I mean, first of all, the little SD cards are a little flimsy. I use CF. This takes 2 CF. My 1D Mark IV takes 1 of each. You're putting those cards, they're reasonably expensive, but you don't want to get dust and grit inside them because you can't get it out. Take extra batteries. That's usually the nightmare I have before I take a trip, is that I'm on the plane, I'm almost there, I can't get back, and they don't have a decent store, and I forgot to take a battery charger. So I'm limited to like 400 shots and I'm done. So it's like, you know, be like Ansel Adams carrying 10 glass plates up the mountain going, better not crack one, you know. So the equivalent today is, you know, 150 gigs and you're afraid you'll run out. Let's go to the next one and we'll finish up here. So optional gear. I don't consider some of this optional. Take sunglasses if you're hiking. Take sunscreen if you're a person who is a little bit susceptible to it, which I am. Take a hat. Lens pen, I have a lens pen in that bag. Hoodman loop. Anybody not know what the Hoodman loop is? Everybody know what that is? Little rubber thing, hold it against your LCD on the back. Hoodman makes a bracket for it, which I got, but it really adds too much when I try to pack this stuff, but it allows you to like flip it up out of the way and shoot it. So if you're shooting landscapes, take it with you because you don't care about portability quite so much. But looking there, like using the live view, then using the Hoodman, it makes a big difference sometimes of whether you got it. Scissors. Sometimes you got to cut something. Take some string with you to tie up those bushes out of the way. You know, cut them. Don't cut the bush. Cut the string and then tie it back. Zip disc reflector. Make your own light. I said sometimes you make your own light, so use a flash or don't use a flash. Weatherproofing, that makes sense. Light meter. How many people take a light meter? Who's got a light meter with them right now? How many people? They're on sale. No. Who's got a light? One person has, okay, 2, because I got mine. Oh, you got an iPhone, okay, fine. Light meter is important, not because you can control the overall light, but if you know what the ambient light is, you can adjust for it. And if you carry even a piece of white cloth, if I know I'm going like to a botanic garden, I'll carry a white zip disk, and I can set it up behind and create an uncluttered background. I can put it in front and create some reflection to get underneath the flower. There are a lot of things you can do. Right angle viewfinder, if you're like me and the knees used to work, and you can get down, but you can't get it back up. Right angle viewfinder replaces the one here. Look down on it, like using your 4x5 and a card reader. So let's go There's a couple things. So in the nature techniques, to finish up, I got 3 minutes. Back button focus. I can't tell you how to do it for your camera, but people will tell you. They're online, look for back button focus. The little manual that comes translated from Japanese usually doesn't explain it very well. It's a menu item. There's a website called birdsasart.com. Art Morris, Birds as Art. Art Morris is a nature photographer. He publishes PDF books. I bought 3 or 4 of them. They're very helpful. They don't have pretty pictures and stuff in them. They just say, pay attention, do this, and you'll take better photos. So depending on the scenario I want, he tells you how to set, for your camera. So you can buy one for the 1DX, you can buy one for the 5D Mark III, $20, $30. But if you're out there trying to shoot images I am and you're spending $1,000 to go, it's worth $30 to figure out how to do it better. I'd say always shoot raw, especially in nature. You can't control the light. You're going to have a problem. You want to be able to adjust it. AI focus, if it moves, use AI focus. Same thing with stabilizers. If it's not going to move, there's a dispute about whether you should turn the stabilization off on newer lenses or the VR feature or whatever. And the books will generally say you can leave it on. But if it's not going to move, why have it? Why worry about it? Take it off, turn it off. You're taking a landscape, that rock I shot I was going to fall down, but that rock wasn't going to move. So if your tripod is steady because you didn't buy the tripod with a center post and pull it way up here so the wind is blowing it around, then take the VR off. Keep it sturdy, sandbag it if you need. I always use, when I have a center mount, they either have hooks or you can get hooks for them, and I hang my camera bag because I take so much junk with me that that's going to hold it through a hurricane. And hold that thing down, turn off stabilization, manually focus, get your good image. Roll, I said. The multi-shot for wildlife is really good if it's moving because it gives you better chances to capture the behavior, or it gives you a lot of extra frames of junk. So you decide what you want to do. With flying birds, I always use multi-shot because if the bird is flying like those you had at the early, their wings go up, their wings go down. Sometimes their wings go sideways. You don't know where they're going to be when you get them in focus and when you know you want to punch that shot. So if you take 3 or 4 or 5 shots, you're more likely, as I did, to get somewhere the head's visible. I think we got one more, maybe. Depth of field, here's some things I'll throw out. These will be whatever. And I've heard these from other people, generally think they're true. I want to use AI focus, or whatever it's called on Nikon, for birds in flight. I want to get 5, 6 or better, and the reason is the birds are kind of big. If you're shooting sparrows, you can go wide open. I'll usually I hope I can shoot at f8, like those eagles. 1/1000th of a second or faster. And what I've done on the Mississippi, because you're following them, you've got water, you've got trees, you've got sky, you've got trees, you've got sky, you've got water. You can't control the ISO, so I just put it on auto, and I bust up the shutter to where I want it, and I don't touch anything else. So it gives you a higher percentage of acceptable shots to me. With landscapes, take off all that auto machine gun shot. You're going to take one at a time. I like to shoot at f14 or better, which I learned from Richard going out there. F11's okay, but the deeper the field, the more of it you want. When you're shooting the valleys and the canyons, there's a lot of depth to what you're shooting. Focus on something in the foreground. Make sure it's near infinity. Most of your lenses, you move them to infinity, you probably moved them too far. So find infinity, use your live view, find something close, get it up there, then lock it in manual so you don't mess it, and take your shots. You can use low shutter speeds. Some of those shots that I've taken of the rocks were taken at 1/50th, 1/20th, 1/5 of a second because I used really low ISO. The astrophotography, like there's a shot in the other room that you probably won't get to see tonight now, that's got all the stars, 1/20th of a second or less than 1/30, because 1/30th the stars start moving. So you want it wide open so you can pull light in. And we already talked about macro lens being really narrow. Focus stacking is the way to go. They make focus stacking rails, or you can try to inch your camera back and estimate and try to do it yourself. I've got a rail. I'm looking forward to spring. I'm going to try to use it more. And what you do there is you keep the item in focus, but you just move the camera a precise amount forward and back of that apparent critical focus point and build it so it's reasonably focused in the front, reasonably focused in the back. So, and I think, click, yes, there we go. So, thank you.